up and tell us about their onboarding program.
There isn't one.
The honesty is awesome. Excellent. Hand over here. This is kind of a confession that we don't have one, but at times where we've onboarded multiple board members at one time, we've invited Jenny to hop on just a call with us. And she was, I'm from the Minnesota chapter, so she was a past president of ours. So she does actually kind of have our perspective, but I think that she's willing to do that. And then Julie Jones is at our table and kind of gave the idea of a PowerPoint and said that something like that could possibly be shared from national. That would be kind of a framework of here's the national overview, here's where you fit into that, and then we can tailor it to the way that our board works.
Very cool. So, yes, Jenny is a wonderful resource for that, and we could, and there could be a collaboration on what the onboarding program looks like, and it could be shared. See, Jenny walked out of the room, which I thought was really fun when you talked about that, because we can do what with her now? Colin told her. Yes, absolutely.
Why do you think I had nothing to say? All started with Minnesota.
You had it up.
Any of you that were at the awards banquet last night and saw the list of Vicki at the Oregon chapter with leadership, she really made sure that our board members knew their roles and spent time gathering them. Our membership person just didn't put her on. She spent time making sure she knew what was expected and continues to follow up with people, including me, about what needs to be done, so people are clear on that. I just realized someone's taking my picture. Hold on.
I totally love that. Oh no, I have to stop talking right now. Great. So Vicki. Queen Vicki.
No, I just want to make sure so Vicki could be a resource to you guys, right? Do you all know Vicki? Okay, excellent. I mean, here's the deal. We're together for a short period of time. You're not going to get everything, but the most important thing I think that for you to have is the names of the people you can go connect with to get the rest of the answer. Am I right? Okay, hang on 1 second here quickly, and then we're going to go over there.
One of the more innovative ones I've seen, and I haven't seen it in our chapters quite yet, is there's a video tutorial from the previous chapter, the leaders or the group leaders as they were. This is for a different organization. And they did a video of what they learned, what they wished they had learned quickly. There was a series of questions that they answered. There was a video record that they literally handed to the next provider in that space. Not that they didn't have a chance to talk to them, but it gave them more of a reference point to go back to and just play back saying, I wish I'd known this sooner, or if I started this rather than that. And it was a kind of a fun thing for them to do to play, a little history in the video. So.
I love that. So that's a great way to, if you don't have anything else, that's a great way to get started. Go interview, take your phone, right? Say, tell me how about the year has been. What do you know now you didn't know then?
Right.
Now all of a sudden you at least you can fill in some of the blanks, right? Mm-hmm. Perfect. You had your hand up right there. Brandon.
What we like to do for onboarding in British Columbia, because the terms start January 1st, is when we're bringing on new board members. Our retreat is actually in the November prior to the year starting, so we bring them to the retreat so that they're part of the planning process, and that's when we go through the strategic plan for the year, we go through the budget, we do our board commitment forms, we go through the role descriptions, we update them as needed, and it really gives them the opportunity to kind of see what we've done over the past year, what our pain points are, and what we're planning to do moving forward.
Excellent. I love that. Bringing folks in and letting them see. I would encourage you, if it's a strategic planning session, and you've got some committee members that you think might be interested in moving forward, a strat plan session is a great opportunity to get additional voices in, and then they get to see the process. That's a powerful way of beginning the onboarding process. Sometimes we don't need a whole lot of things, we need opportunities. Here and then here. I don't know who reached first, but why don't you go? She's got the microphone. She's going. I'm sorry, dude.
So I want to, the power, the muscle,
So we do that. I've tasked my board members throughout the year to mentor the onboarding process for the incoming year for 2020, and we do the same. We make sure that this last for my board, I made sure that everybody was in place and everybody that I wanted to go to our strategic planning session was there.
Good.
So that's important. I think it's very important to do that all year long, so people know the expectations when fall comes, and then you're asking them, hey, what would you like to do and get out of it this year? So.
Awesome, great.
So, we do all exactly the same thing everybody has mentioned.
Oh, good, we're done, guys.
Yeah, we're done. We can leave. That means we can have lunch. I'm hungry.
Oh, yeah, let's do lunch, let's do lunch. No,
So, yeah, last year in DC, you brought this, and what made us change this year, and me change this year, is understanding that what is my passion? What do I want to do in the board? And I actually came in with our new Madam President this year, and that's what we're doing. We are now asking our board, what is your passion? What are you good at? What do you want to do? And I found my passion, and I'm on fire. I'm ahead of schedule. I'm just going at it with so much energy. And honestly, it's because of what you shared last year. Made us go back to the board and say, hey guys, so we're not gonna point and say, you do social media, you do this, you do that. Let's find out what your love language is and what your passion is on this board to be volunteer. Because we all have full-time jobs.
That's true, that's true.
Hey, Peggy, we've got one back here.
Okay, great.
And
And Jenny, you're in charge of the time, so you just need to.
Oh, I am? Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yep, on it.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So we do pretty much everything that everyone else mentioned, but one thing that we do reinforce, we have a board commitment form. So during the onboarding, we review that commitment and have them reestablish that they are still committed. And because we are in headquarters territory, we always try to do our onboarding face-to-face.
Nice.
So I have folks come to the headquarters office and they can meet the staff and get a tour of the office and see how the chapter fits in with the overall organization.
So I love that. Excellent, excellent. So let me make a suggestion here. If everything, we don't even have time for you to answer this question, but I'm going to lay it out there for you. Okay, I'm going to lay it out there right now. If y'all are doing everything saying, then how come yesterday, when we asked you the question about chapters, so many of you put in, we don't have leaders. We're struggling with leaders. Because what?
Nothing's a magic bullet.
No, nothing is a magic bullet. But the reason why I'm asking that question, and you don't have to answer it, and today in the campfires you get a chance to do a little bit more conversation around this, but I want to lay that out there because what I'm trying to get you to do is to say, okay, we got that, but what else did she say? How do I tweak that? Because if it's not producing exactly what I need to, then some piece of it is missing. I'm guessing that on the onboarding question, what might be missing is the fact that you're doing it once somebody has said yes. Guys, onboarding starts before I say yes. Onboarding is part of, you know how when a donor, you get somebody to give you $5 or $10 and then you get them to go back out again and you're reeling them in, right? The onboarding is part of how you are helping people see just exactly how rich the group is in people who are dedicated, passionate, creative, innovators. It's where you're inviting them to learn more. So that's why I said with your strat plan meeting, bring in people that you look at and you go, wow, I think Erin could be president someday. I don't know if she even wants to be, but let's see if she's available to come and join us from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock as we're talking about X. Does that make sense? I have the rest of the day. 4 and 5, I can't talk about them separately. You're going to go, why not? Because if you're building an evaluation, it's tying to rewards and recognition. My mantra in evaluation, is to follow these 4 elements. I'm going to lay them on you real quickly. We can talk about them a little bit later at lunch. The evaluation comes as part of the rewards and recognition. What I mean is don't separate them, right? Or what I could also say is recognize activity, reward outcomes. Give meaningful, immediate, relevant feedback. I follow something called rocks and roses. Some people also refer to the Royal Sandwich. Compliment, concern, compliment. What I do is I always say to folks around my table, and I'm on a national committee right now as chair, and I say to folks, you got to give me rocks and roses. You got to tell me what's not working for you, and you got to tell me what is working for you. You got to tell me what you have questions about or concerns about, and then you also have to tell me what you think we can do differently, right? Rocks and roses. And when I do that, it just that whole sense of rocks and roses, all of a sudden, well, I know that if I'm going to get both, if this conversation is going to explore it deeply on both sides of it, then I can take whatever information that you're giving me. Here's the problem. If we do not do the rocks and roses, and you've got somebody who isn't performing, and they get kicked down the can, and pretty soon they're president, they will not perform as president. But it could be their lack of performance has everything to do with being in the wrong role or not having the right orientation and onboarding. That's why I love the idea of interviewing someone at the end of the year and saying, what did you learn? What didn't you learn, right? Because that's how you can talk, same kind of conversation with someone else.
Do you have a template of what, like an interview template?
Yes.
For those questions?
Yes.
Okay.
And for, I don't know, a bottle of wine I could.
Salted nut roll I could give you? I have two.
Okay, 2. All right, 2. Yes. I'll get that to you. I'll share it with you. And then the last thing I want to mention is, I love this hashtag, do this, not that. What that means is sometimes you have to just say to somebody very specifically what needs to get done, and in the same sentence, what shouldn't get done. So if you're correcting behavior, you can always say, for example, on an event where you're trying to get them to give you the content in enough time in order to have the registration open in the right time, you can say, look, I appreciate that you're busy. I get that. I understand all of that. But I have to let you know that we need the content 30 days in advance, not 15 days in advance. Mm-hmm. So the feedback gives them some very specifics. Reward and recognize, and this is actually where I'm leaving us today, because reward and recognize, the most important thing you can do is make this as personal as possible. So I'm going to have you do this as we segue you to the next very important conversation. Am I right? Very important conversation. I'd like to give you 60 seconds at your table. I want you to come up with 5 ways to reward and recognize volunteers that you're not already doing. No certificates, no at the podium, thank you. As we switch our AV, I'm going to come back to you in 60 seconds and I'm going to ask rapid fire for 5 ways that we can add to our arsenal for rewards and recognitions. Who's with me? Woo! All right, listen, I'm more fun than money, right? All right, 60 seconds on the clock as we switch it around.
Lapel pins. It's an underrated value, but it's a recognition in any social environment. What was it? Lapel pins. Yeah. They're very easy. They're about $1 something each at 100 pound weight. You can do it both for designation and for annualization of the participation.
Yeah.
You can color code them up to being an initial with the board member, just simply being part of the board. Then you can go and recognize the position, and then eventually you can put tenure to it as well, the recognition of somebody, because you do have a repetitive cycle. Once you get into that loop and you are good at what you do within the board, it's hard to designate somebody new to the board than somebody that's been doing it for 5 years. You at least give them the recognition capability of 5 years, 10 years, because they are good and they do cycle through different positions.
Yeah.
And they eventually, if they are being groomed correctly to the presidential part of the aspect of it, then you can acknowledge that. And that's something they can retain with them, again, going back to businesses and calling cards. The lapel pin going into any environment, whether they're walking in to do a business engagement, to a solicitation of support or whatever, it adds legitimacy to it.
I know that thing is changing.
Oh, sorry.
All right.
We had a chance to.
Yeah, a little
That was a minute.
That's
That
a
was
secret
60
society
seconds. Do you see these flip charts you still have on your table?
No, she took on it.
I want you to write them down, and I want you to pepper the walls back there in the corner with it. And we need 5 good ideas, right, Bob?
Particular meeting event, but a meeting event.
All right,
It's kind of like
write 'em
policy
down.
stuff that's given to you when you become part of the board.
Let's talk
this
more.
Is your notebook for your board relationship. It is the definitive place in which you do all of your work from. That way, when you hand out things or you provide things, it goes into this notebook, because as we know from all the things that we do, there's this thing. The other would be to create potentially, and we'll talk about with Jenny and so forth, a tiered relationship with similarities of board relationships. Like you're president, why isn't there presidential board? People can share their peer level relationship conversations, so that a peer president from one chapter they talk to another president from another chapter, a great collaboration. There's a recognition that when you reach a certain board position, you can be part of a unique group that allows you to go bring collaborate at the level of the same issues. If you're social for your board, you're talking to other people that have to worry about the social for their board. Right. So you can share common interests and commonalities.
Lucky you're on the table.
I'm sorry.
I know, because I'm like, we do this, we do this, we do this, but.
I'm like a crisp $20 bill, you know?
So we do feel like, I mean, I know there's something we do, but it's really helpful. We actually have pictures in the iPads.
Yeah.
So when they become a board member, they get a pen.
Nice.
And any speaker that comes, they get a pen. So that they go off and talk. So we've got, you've got one of the pens.
I got one of the pens.
Yeah.
One of the pens.
Yeah.
But it's a unique distinction. Just like I have my little cover. I know those are not things I just throw out to everybody. It's like literally, we did something together with one of those. And whether you put it on or not, it's whether you put it on a lanyard. It's just a way of me acknowledging that we have something different than just anybody else that happens.
Yeah. See, and I like that too, because I mean, especially in the world of sales, if I wore that.
All right. Thank you everyone for sharing and getting those notes down. So we are going to transition to our next topic, and I've heard from several of you. Yes, finances cannot be the most exciting thing to talk about, but I have to tell you, in conversations with Bob and Fran and I, as we were walking through this next presentation, I'm really excited to have you all think of your chapters as small businesses. This is a really engaging session, so get your phones ready, get your fingers ready, and with no further ado, our president and CEO, Mr. Bob Gilbert.
Okay, so we're going to talk about something that you normally talk about. So let's do this first. Everybody got a water bottle or a glass of water in front of you? Pick it up, take a sip.
Coffee.
No.
Now you may not know that, but you just curbed your hunger pains for another 30 minutes. Alright, so deal with it. Alright? I want to thank Fran and Jenny for putting this on a general session stage. It's a topic we need to talk about more. But I don't want to thank them for putting me on after Derek, number 1, and just before lunch, number 2. But there will be no dancing. We all learned this morning that white people don't run, and there'll be no singing. But we do get your phones ready because we're going to do some polling. But let me ask you this just first by a show of hands. How many people got into this industry through sales? How many through marketing? How many through revenue management? How many through finance and accounting? That's what we thought. Okay. So, Lauren gave you an overview yesterday of what are some things that are helpful to think about when it comes to marketing, particularly through social media for your chapters. We're going to talk about something that historically has sort of been the elephant in the room. How can you dream big about your chapters without having the resources to do something? You can have the best volunteers in the world, you have the best strategic plan, but the reality is at the end of the day, you've got to have some resources. So we've done some benchmarking from your chapters, and we're going to share that today with what some of the metrics look like from small, medium, and large chapters. Again, we don't talk about this a lot, but it's important because you do have the responsibility of running a small business. So what we're going to do is dream big. What does it take to be a legendary chapter? But the reality is there's some common denominators. And they really simply are, you've got to know what the potential is of your chapter. And last year at the regional series, you talked a lot about what's the penetration in your market, how much membership potential do you have? You know, we tend to talk headquarters, we've got, about 7,000 members globally, but we've got 30,000 customers, people that are buying stuff at non-member prices, and that's okay in some cases. But with the vision, what's the potential or the unique space in your market? We talked about that yesterday. Find some white space the DMOs talked about that. What's unique that you can bring to your market? What's the plan? You need the leadership. We've heard from Peggy. I think Peggy's awesome. You need succession plan. You need your leadership. But at the end of the day, you still need resources. You got to be able to make it happen. You probably need to pay a managing director. They're not going to work for free. All your headquarters staff doesn't work for free, although sometimes it feels like it. But you need to have the resources to implement the plan. So how do you get there? So we're going to talk about three things real quick before lunch. You've curbed your appetite now, so bear with me, buckle your seatbelts. We're going to talk about financial reserves. We're going to talk about benchmarks. We're going to talk about financial management. A very uncomfortable topic with a bunch of type A's that came from sales, marketing, and revenue management. So bear with me. Number one, get your phones out. We're going to switch platforms for a second. We were on menti.com yesterday. If you're not there, go there. You only have to enter this code once, and we've got a series of rapid-fire questions we're going to run through to find out what you're thinking about your chapter's financials. And these aren't going to be statistically accurate because we know we've got multiple people voting from the same chapters, but we think it'll be a representative sample in the room. So number one, just simple yes or no. Do you have a reserve or a savings account? Okay, so we're in pretty good shape there. We've got 24 votes. We're coming in, 25. Good. Some type of reserve or some type of savings account. We're up to 40 that are on menti.com. Anybody have any trouble logging in? You okay? All right, we're going to just keep moving for the sake of time. We're in good shape here. The next question is, how much do you think is in that reserve account? Approximately how much? And there's just some, you may have to guess on this a little bit. It's a judgment call. But the questions on the next slide give you some broad ranges. How much do you think is in there? Under 5,000, 5 to 25, over 25K, I don't know. And just so you know, yesterday when Fran and Jenny met with the presidents and managing directors, we gave out a copy of the annual leadership board brief that ASAE publishes every year. And one of the fundamentals they say all your boards need to be oriented on is finances, right? Now the thing that I thought was really comical in here is that the sample balance sheet and financial income statement that's in here for an association, the association had an annual revenue of $76 million. Okay, now whether you have $76 million in annual revenue or $7,000, the same principles still apply, but it's in here if you need some detail to go back and share with the rest of your board members. Okay, so this is where you stand as a group. So let's look at the next slide in terms of what is the average? What does ASAE say? Well, they do actually benchmark this stuff, and the rule of thumb is that most organizations should have set aside in a savings account 3 to 6 months of the year in your operating revenue. So if your chapter is doing $30,000 a year in revenue between dues, registrations, sponsorships, you should probably have about 3 to 6 months or half of that set aside in reserves. Why? Is it because they're trying to make a profit? No. We're all non-profits, but things happen. Things happen where something goes south. Maybe there's an event that doesn't go well. I remember a couple of years ago, Joanne was almost in tears because, Joanne, did you guys buy a car and then nobody bought it? It was a cow raffle. Yeah, things happen. The economy, there's a lot of skeptics, a lot of hotel owners and asset managers are talking about the economy right now. What's going to happen in 2020? Is it going to be a bump or a hiccup? Or is it going to be a recession? Most people now think it's going to be a bump. But there's also the better use of reserves is when your chapter comes up with that great idea of something you want to develop, you usually need some resources to go out and jumpstart that initiative. So it's not because you just want to make money, it's because you need to have access to resources when you need it most. When you're trying to dream big about what's that new program you need to invest in, you may need to take some money from reserves to proactively go out and invest in that. So that's the rule of thumb. So how do you build one? Well, you've got to start with a simple operating plan and a budget that generates a surplus. It's real simple. You know, a lot of associations just target to produce a budget that breaks even, but you really do want to have a small surplus there. Give yourself some wiggle room. So we put together some examples, and some of you may remember we did this the last time. We did some benchmarks. It was about 7 or 8 years ago that we presented. We hadn't updated them since then. So we gathered some samples from different chapters, and you get these slides. So I'm going to go through them relatively quick, but you'll get the gist of the graphics. We made some assumptions about how you were classifying revenue from your financial statements as well as expenses. And we did have to make a couple of judgment calls, but we clustered them into these revenue categories. Usually your meetings, your fundraisers, dues, sponsorship, or other. There were some things that we really may not have fit into those categories. So those were the general categories we used. For small chapters, the revenue mix over a 2-year period looked something like this. 62% of the revenue last year came from meetings and events. 24% came from dues. 7% came from fundraising, 7% sponsorship. And some people might merge those two. It really depends on how you're classifying it. And then really 1% other. So no major surprises there from small chapters. You know, I tell people in the association business, whether it's headquarters, the Americas region, or your chapter, our business model is based on 3 things. It's either dues, registrations, or sponsorships. That's our business model. It's real simple. You've got to make money through one of those 3 areas. When we look at the expense side of the equation, again, we made some standardization assumptions about how most of your money gets spent. We call management in general, which is really your overall fixed operating costs. Usually that's going to be your managing director. For HSMAI Americas, it's all the headquarters staff and our overhead expenses. Officer and board expenses, whether it's your officer director liability insurance, board retreats, things like that, coming to leadership, meetings, membership and marketing, charity, things you're giving away, or some other. There are some things we weren't quite sure where to classify. So we may have made some judgment calls on where we parked some of these, but I don't think it made a material difference in how the mixed percentages shook out. In the small chapter example, from an expense standpoint, the number 1 expense was meetings. And that varied dramatically by chapter. We didn't do the academic approach to this. We didn't do a median. We just took some averages because some of you have a lot of your events that are hosted or sponsored by different venues. But that was the biggest expense. Number 2 was management in general. Not surprising if you've got somebody you're paying a retainer or a monthly honorarium to as a managing director. Charity was number 3. That needs to be a judgment call by you. I'd say look at that all in context of, have you met your reserves goal yet? Don't give away the store until you know you're operating solidly as a small business. Number 4 is officer and board. Look at the last one. Membership marketing. Now this is only small chapters. We'll look at the same metrics or the same benchmarks for medium and large next. But membership and marketing was like 1%. And then other was negligible. Okay. So you get these slides, but these are just to give you an example of what you look like in aggregate, and go back and sort of benchmark yourself and say, do we intentionally want to move or shift our revenue mix or expense mix to do what we need to do, and then also work towards a reserve goal. On the medium chapter, revenue mix, we had about 7 chapters. We had actual financials for. We looked at this. Not dramatically different, but we looked at these over 3 years because we had some better data. Meetings and events is number 1, dues is number 2. Fundraising is number 2, dues is number 3, and then other and sponsorship. Now, at a glance, I would make a general assumption, say that most medium chapters in the sample probably have a pretty big opportunity on the sponsorship side, because that's usually money that you can monetize the value you can give to partners for the exposure you can give them at an event. Doesn't mean just letting them speak at your event and give an infomercial. That may be good for them, but may not be high value to your attendees. All depends on the partner. On the expense side for the medium chapters, again, number one expense was meetings and events. Number two was charity. Now, I'm not making a judgment call. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but go back to what we talked about yesterday. Why does your chapter exist? If the number one reason HSMAI chapters exist is to create a value proposition based upon the business reason for companies to pay dues, to focus on all the inbound leisure business, corporate business, or meetings and conventions business coming to your market, it seems a little counterintuitive that our number two expense would be giving to charity. Yeah, we want to support the local community, I get that, but ask the question strategically to the board, is this what you're intending to do? Number three is management in general, officer and board. And again, marketing and membership services is down towards the bottom. If we look quickly at large chapter mix, we only have 4 chapters in this model. Number one event, not surprisingly, was meetings. Typically, they're going to have a larger registration fee. They're going to have a lot more members, probably non-members attending their events. Number two on the revenue mix was fundraising. Perhaps some of these larger chapters are a little more mature. They've been around longer. They may have some more signature programs that have really been institutionalized in their markets. That's definitely an opportunity to optimize revenue on those types of events. It's a great thing. Dues, not as dependent on dues as the small and medium-sized chapters. And then they also have sponsorship, and then they may have some other special events that fall in that other category. On an expense side, what the large chapters look like was meetings was still number one, management G was number two. They probably have more time and talent that they're having on board in terms of their managing directors, and perhaps some other expenses because they're larger organizations. Their officer director liability insurance probably costs a little more, things like that. O&B, charity, membership marketing were all in that what I call the single-digit range. They're very, you can't really rank them because it's sort of like a roller coaster over the 3 years that we looked at of financials. So all small as a percentage of total expense mix. Okay. So some rules of thumb. There really is no right answer in terms of what your mix should be, but I think this is where benchmarking can be helpful. It just gives you a relative sense of what you may be. It really depends on your own strategy. It's going to depend on what your board wants to do strategically, but you should go back and look at your own trends. Just pull out the last 3 year-end financials and do the math. It's relatively simple to do, because even though you may not have come into the industry through finance or accounting, you probably know how to work a spreadsheet, right? It's real simple. For your operational margin, set a goal for your chapter. What's a reasonable goal for you? For the Americas region, we set a goal a few years ago that is intentionally we want to set aside 3% of our goal annually in that operating margin, so until we meet our reserve goal. That was a very intentional goal. Now, some years we've met it, some years we haven't, but that's still the goal. If you have a especially successful event or some unforeseen revenue, don't just spend it necessarily without thinking through it. It's like if you get a tax refund from the IRS, put some of it in savings. That's okay. You don't have to go on a spending spree immediately. Not that it's wrong, but as long as it needs to be a board decision, is this strategically what we want to do? And I mentioned that's what our goal is for the Americas region. So, what are the fundamentals of a small business? I don't think any of us ever thought that our HSMAI role would give us some teaching on what a small business is, but it's really simple. You've got an owner, they set the vision. In our case, the owners are our members. Number two is you got to have a strategy, your annual plan. 3 is you got to promote your product or service. And marketing is what we spend the least amount of money on currently, whether you're a small, medium, or large chapter. Now, it doesn't cost a lot of money directly, as Lauren illustrated yesterday, but certainly there should be some time and energy, perhaps more, depending on how you're doing at your event attendance and so forth in that area. You've got to have some type of record keeping. That's part of a small business, as painful as it is. Yeah, we all have to do it. So find a service that does that. And there are some legal services and requirements that vary by state or by country. So those are the fundamentals of a small business. It's real simple. You can't do 4 of the 5. Ultimately, you got to do all 5. So let's get your phones back out real quick. Let's do a couple quick questions. Who's responsible for your accounting? The receipts and disbursements of funds that you're dealing with? Is it your managing director? Do you outsource your accounting? The other, not sure, board treasurer? Okay. Clearly the board treasurer. Hopefully they have a little bit of finance savvy. If not, you need to figure out how to give them some support. Okay. Let's go on to the next question. There we go. Whoops, back one. There we go. What do you use for the reporting of your financials? I'm not sure we've ever asked this question before. Is it accounting software? You're just doing it on an Excel spreadsheet? Is it QuickBooks, Quicken? What do you use? Spreadsheets are winning. All right. Spreadsheets are winning, all right? Next question, for those of you using software, what is it called? Now, if you don't know, that's fine, but if you are using some type of accounting software, we're curious what this room looks like. And just it's open field, so just type in. There's no multiple choice, just type in what do you use. Quicken, QuickBooks Online. Gee, maybe we need to buy stock in QuickBooks. Okay. Quick Nooks. I haven't heard of that one before. Okay. All right. So I don't see anybody new up there, Jenny, we hadn't heard about. I think QuickBooks is the dominant one. It's pretty easy. Whether you're doing $76 million a year in revenue, you're doing $7,000, QuickBooks will work. Is there anything other than QuickBooks anybody's used? Okay. Let's keep moving then. So let's talk quickly about safeguarding receipts and deposits. It sounds, you think, I'm at an HSMA meeting, we're talking about accounting controls, you're nuts. But as Jenny mentioned to the managing directors yesterday, in the 10 years that our staff has been here, we have witnessed some things that we never thought would happen. One person serving jail time because of that, a former chapter leader. And long term, we've seen embezzlement from multiple chapters. There's all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't think would go on from people, but it happens in real life. So we want to get your sentiment on a couple different things. First, next polling question. Estimate the mix of how your chapter receives its revenue. We suspect this has changed a lot in the last few years. Is it cash, credit cards, ACH, wire transfers? You know, used to be a lot of cash floating around. I think validates what we were thinking, but we thought we'd just check and see. Credit cards certainly alleviates some of the control concerns that perhaps chapters had even 10 years ago.
Bob, just to clarify, credit card is also debit card, correct?
Yes, yeah, credit or debit card. Yeah, and on the polling question, your math is being tested. This is a subliminal test. You have to add up to 100. Okay? Good. Lauren?
How do they, for like Stripe and Square and stuff, where does it land for that?
I would say it's electronic.
So credit cards?
Because even if you're swiping it, somebody's sliding a credit card through.
Okay.
That's where the bank, how the money gets to the bank.
Okay.
Okay? All right, so we're clearly 70% of credit cards. Not surprising. I think 5, even 10 years ago, this would have been a lot less. But this alleviates a lot of the concerns. When there was a day when a lot ran out of a cigar box and cash, there was a lot more opportunities for control issues to need to be in place. All right, next question. There's not a polling question, but I want to hear what you have to say. In terms of how do you manage receipts? Who's actually in charge of that? We've got a couple mics floating around. What are some good practices you found in terms of managing your receipts? You got the credit card piece, but for the non-credit card piece, who's physically collecting the checks, taking it to the bank? Do you feel like you've got a control process in place? How's that working for you? Got a couple back here, Jenny. Okay.
Yep, the mic's on. For the Austin chapter, I'm the managing director, also the treasurer. And for the receipts, I will take a picture of it and put it as an attachment in QuickBooks. So that becomes my Bible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Phones help us do everything
Blair?
these days, don't they?
We're just in Texas here.
As far as managing receipts, we do something kind of similar in terms of copying to send over to our treasurer. If it's myself, the president, we send everything over to our VP of Finance. That will keep track of those items when she's balancing against the statements. In terms of how we handle when we have incoming cash or checks on site for an event, is at the end of the event, it's reconciled with either the managing director or the president with a sign off of what's being sent to the bank to make sure anything that's need to be deposited is handled
So on
appropriately.
site, you've got that reconciliation. Do you also reconcile it with the reg list, so you know anybody that hasn't paid and may still owe you?
Correct. That is post event, but as far as on site, right at the end before everybody leaves, since that money is going to be handled by one person to go to the bank, we have a sign off to make sure that monies are
two people
dual control in a sense.
Okay, excellent. Any other best practices that anybody wants to share that's easy to implement, you feel is a good solid control? Well, let's pivot to the next question real quick. How do you disperse your funds? Same question. How do you disperse money? What's the authorization process for the check going out? What?
Hello. So our chapter actually has a disperse form. So like, for example, if we have our programs or with our charity donations, it is actually a form that they have to complete showing who it's, if it's a check that we're writing or needs to be a credit card payment, there's who it's going to, if it's an address that needs to be sent off to it, then also what part of our budget it categorizes into. There's a VP signature sign off on it as well, and then any supporting documentation is required.
Perfect. So you got a paper trail for that, okay? Hey, Kathy had her hand up.
We have a payment request form as well, and it requires the backup receipts. We cut a check, which requires 2 signatures, which is kind of our safety net. When we pay by a credit card, it's generally for an event that we've held, and that's approved by the VP of programs.
Okay, great. Do a lot of you pay for your expenses with the chapter credit card? Yes, no?
How about raise your hand if you pay with the chapter credit card?
You have a chapter credit card for expenses. Okay, all right, good. So if you don't, that's something easy way to do that, and you can go back and control that as well.
It's not only an easy way to do it, but if you have a credit card that is tied to a rewards program, you can use that for supporting leadership registrations or any other expense, really.
Absolutely. Jeff, speak up.
Hold on. Hold on, Jeff.
Jenny's coming.
A lot of the new bank cards have a lot of the same protections that you would get with some of the better credit cards in terms of security and refunds and that sort of thing.
Okay. All right, good. I know after lunch we get more time in our chapter best practice roundtables, but just wanted to hit some headlines here. Mitch?
Yeah, we use actually QuickBooks Online to bill sponsors for the sponsorships and stuff like that. So it actually sends them an invoice, so they find that helpful, and then they can pay it with ACH or with a credit card. So it's really simple for us, and we can have receivables too.
And there's no one solution that's perfect for everybody, but if we've done nothing today but create a level of awareness or thinking or a couple of nuggets of good ideas that may cause you to go back and look at your processes or possibly refine them, that's really why we just wanted to bring this up real quick. Okay. estimate the mix of how your money gets spent. We talked about this quickly, but let's get the sentiment into the room, back on your polling, in terms of how you're dispersing your expenses. Is it checks, credit cards, wire transfers? We've heard examples from all the above. Your chapter doesn't have a credit card. That's certainly the simplest way to do a lot of this. Seems like so many businesses are getting away from checks altogether now. There's many other ways to automate it. So you're assuming that about 50% of your disbursements going out over 50% are via credit card. Okay, good. And these slides will be available to you afterwards too if you want copies of them. They all get saved. Okay, let's go on to the next one, please. So the who, the authorization, how they get expended. There's so much email going on these days. We even heard from Derek this morning. We think most people from Africa have $1 million they want to give us, right? But there's this thing called phishing. It may be a tech lecture, but there's so much going on these days. You really need to look in emails. I mean, I think Jenny gave the example. We have people that have used our emails as incognito. It's really easy for hackers to get your email, whether it's a hsmai.org one or your work one. But you've got to be really careful if somebody's sending you an invoice via email. Make sure you've got some controls in place for that. So how are expense disbursements shared? Mitch gave an example. We heard about some disbursement vouchers, check request forms. Anything else that anybody wants to share on that? I think we answered both before. I can tell you our process at headquarters is we have a check disbursement reform, requires 2 signatures, the backup gets attached to it before it goes, and the check gets cut. So again, you've got that paper trail. It makes it really easy to go back and find stuff and allows you to spot check anything that may be suspicious. All right, let's keep going. How many people at your chapter are a signature on your bank account? Have signature rights in your bank account? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more. I think Jenny has some standards for this in the CAR report, but the majority are right where you want to be, 2 or 3. Our staff hears me say this all the time. I say, but if it gets hit by a bus tomorrow, you want to make sure you've got some backup plans in place. It tends to be morbid, but it's just the reality of life. Things happen, and you want to make sure that the small business can continue to operate. Okay, next question, please. So who should let's talk about this for a second. And Jenny and Stacy have the mics, but who should these people be and how often should it be updated? Any best practices of what you're currently using? Who should they be? I assume the treasurer that showed up earlier. And how often should it be updated? Kathy?
Our executive committee will have authorization to sign a check, and it's updated annually. Okay.
So if it's gone through disbursement form, a couple of people have already signed that, but it only requires 1 person then to sign the physical check.
No,
2 on the check also. So you've got double safety feature. Okay.
As far as for our account signing at Dallas, we have our chapter president, the VP of finance, and then the managing director always have signatory authority. As far as the procedures of getting the cross-check of disbursement is then again the signers have to authorize the disbursement.
Okay. How often should it be updated? Would you get this? I would say at least annually. Make sure you don't have some, people that were president 5 years ago and are not still active on the board on your bank account still. So it should be at least annually when you elect your new officers. It's real simple to get signature cards from your bank. A lot of that can be done online now. Or who has the passwords. Okay. How frequently does your full board see a actual income and expense statement? Let's go back to your phones and see how this looks. At each board meeting, and if it is at each board meeting, if could ignore the other ones if it's not that the board meeting is a frequency. Monthly, quarterly, annually, it varies. Now, an income and expense statement would not just be here's our cash balance. It'd be here's a summary of all of our income we took in for this period of time and all the expenses that were paid out during this period of time. Okay, good. All right, so you're in good shape there. Full disclosure, everybody should know what's going on and exactly what's come in and what's going out. Okay. Okay, here's a test question. For those of you from the U.S., what is the name of the federal IRS form? Sorry, my typo. That every chapter in the U.S. is required to file annually. It's a multiple choice. Is it the W-2? Is it 1040? 1040 EZ? 990? I'm not sure.
Can I ask a question? Here.
Okay, go ahead. Just come with the mic. Julie, a question?
So, I've been filling out this particular form, and I've had him come back and say, well, you're not tax exempt, so they wouldn't accept it.
Which form, the 990? 990 is the right answer, by the way. That's what the IRS calls it. All nonprofit corporations are required to file by law in the U.S. a 990 annually. You used to be exempt from that if your revenue was below a certain threshold. That changed probably, I don't know, Fran, you remember 8, 10 years ago, 5 years ago? Yeah, it changed. It used to be like, if your revenue was under, I think it was threshold was 25,000, but now it's any revenue, 990. So Julie, they came back, you filed the 990, they said that you were not qualified?
Yes.
Did
that chapter have?
Look at the incorporation filing of the chapter.
Okay.
Because maybe it wasn't incorporated as a nonprofit.
Okay. So then if it isn't,
then if it's not incorporated as a nonprofit, you could be liable for income taxes.
Okay.
Would be the difference. So hope in that case you want to hope you lost money rather than make money. Okay, all right. Just another question, whether you're U.S. or not, does your federal, state, or your territory require any additional reports annually? Some states, municipalities do. This is just kind of a yes or no. And we don't have the answer to this because we can't follow what happens in every country or in every state. But if you're not sure, you want to find out. Call either a government office or an accountant or a CPA or somebody should know this if they work for nonprofits. You just want to make sure that you're doing the right thing. Usually the forms are pretty simple. Sometimes it's worth paying a little bit to an accountant or a CPA to do them for you. Most of them you probably can do by yourself, but it wouldn't hurt to have a professional check it. You do that. Okay? So pretty even mix here. I'm not sure. If you're not sure, double check with your state or municipality. So we did that in 32 minutes. Hopefully you're not starving for lunch, but our objective was, the purpose of the leadership conference is to make sure you've got the tools, the resources, and the ideas to best practices to operate your chapters as well as you possibly can. And hopefully we at least generated some ideas that can help you in your chapter dream, and dream big. The intent certainly is you may have fantastic leadership, you got great ideas, but the elephant in the room we don't talk about often enough is do you have the resources to get it done. So to build that reserve account, have some resources, you need to make sure you got some basic controls in place, you got a budget, everybody, you got full disclosure on how that's working for you, and based on what feedback you give to Jenny and Fran, if you want us to do more benchmarking and sort of make this a little annual thing, we can do that, so we know how we're all doing going forward. Okay? So with that, 3 things we covered very quickly: financial reserves, rule of thumbs, 3 to 6 months, hopefully in the bank. 2, you've seen examples of some benchmarks for small, medium, and large chapters. And then hopefully we've just stimulated your thinking with what are some practices you're doing in terms of financial management. Whatever you're doing, hopefully you got one new idea to go back and move the meter up 1 more notch. Okay? Any questions before we move on? Go ahead, Jenny.
We were just having a good discussion back here at the table, because I know this is something that is a lot, especially with new board members, asking this with Julie. And with that question that you asked, Julie, did that chapter have an EIN number or a tax ID?
Yes, and that's what we do.
Okay, so
A tax ID.
Recognize it. I don't remember the message.
A tax ID number in the U.S. is assigned to anybody who's incorporated. Doesn't mean you're nonprofit or not, it just means you're incorporated. But the question would be, what type of corporation was that chapter filed for? Yeah.
Yeah, and you know that something happened. It was actually with the Northern California a few years back, and it came through PayPal wanted, because they had made enough money, needed to verify the EIN number, and the IRS said no, it didn't match. And what had happened is, originally way back, Stacy found the paperwork. It was filed as the Silicon Valley chapter, and for years it's been operating as Northern California. And I'll, over drinks I can tell you the nightmare, but had to go through and filled out some paperwork to get it renamed so it didn't come up again. But they almost lost being able to use PayPal and the IRS standing because they didn't know what it was called. And we went through, it was a big thing. But so it's really important to know that, and that might be the issue. I don't know.
There's definitely an issue with legal names and how you do your operating name. And banks are really starting to crack down on terms of making sure that your bank account is in your legal name. In our case, do you spell and with an ampersand, or is it spelled A-N-D? I mean, it's stupid stuff like that, but it makes a difference, and it can simply throw off a number or a filing like that.
But the incorporation's at the state level, and your tax ID number and all is at the federal level. And you can be an unincorporated not-for-profit recognized as a nonprofit at the federal level, but if it's the federal level saying anything to you, it has to do with something wrong with your EIN filing. So you, unfortunately, you got to go to the IRS.
Correct. And that's always just such a joy. So, Jeff, silly question, I'll repeat it. Jeff's question is there a requirement on what a legal name is supposed to be? No, there's really not an HSMA requirement. You should make sure you've got, obviously, the acronym or the name spelled out with whatever your chapter name is.
And it should be in your chapter charter too, how you designated it.
Yeah, that's a great rule of thumb. Have it match your chapter charter.
And I know I said it yesterday in our president's meeting, but please make sure that your bank accounts are in the chapter's name, not an individual's name, and I know that is true as of today. So don't go changing it to any of your individual names.
Good
and
point,
I think, should we do one more question?
Last question, yeah.
When you do file for a 501c6 nonprofit organization with the IRS, make sure when you get that approval back that you notify the state as well, because I know in California they don't just automatically recognize it, and they actually sent us a letter saying, hey, you didn't file a return properly. So make sure you notify your state. Some states will automatically recognize it, but California doesn't. So if you do that, make sure you're notifying your state as well.
And consider those as permanent documents when you receive your IRS letters. Definitely scan those, save them, have them in a safe place. Make sure Jenny's got a copy. I know you'd be shocked how many times we still get asked for our original IRS letter, which is dated from 1956. I think your dad probably did it, I don't know, but we still have that letter, and people ask for it all the time when we change bank accounts or whatever the case may be. So those are important long-term documents because that proves you're authorized by the IRS to operate as a nonprofit.
So I think, Bob, that's a great question to maybe end with. To this room right now, does everyone know where that letter is? If you do not, can you raise your hand? So I'm going to do the opposite. If you do not know where that letter is. Okay.
And some of those we may have if we've received them over the years, but it may take us some digging to find them. Okay. All right. Let's move on to lunch. The three things, just hopefully we've summarized real quick. Now that you know how many of you have a reserve account, what the rule of thumb is. You have some benchmarks for small, medium, and large chapters that should really help you benchmark your own mix of what you want to do at your board level. And now you get a snapshot of a variety of financial best practices from your peers in the room on what's working and what you may want to go back to your chapter D just to simply raise the bar. So with that, if there's other questions, I'd encourage you to talk about them over lunch or funnel them back to Jenny, and we can certainly add any of these topics to an upcoming call or whatever is appropriate for the, based on the scope of the question. So plan well, manage well, and dream big, become a legendary chapter. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. And now it is time for lunch, and lunch is just